Hey, I'm Jesse. Let's have a devotion. We're going to look at Psalm 131. I think in last week's devotions, we looked at Psalm 130. This one comes right after it. And I feel like it flows naturally from Psalm 103, which we looked at yesterday, providing this beautiful image of the compassion that a father has for his child. So is the faithful love that God has for everyone who fears him. And I wanted to also draw from Matthew 18, the first 5 verses, briefly, just to show you how Jesus would echo the same calling for us to be like children before the Lord that we see here in Psalm 131. Here's the text. Lord, my heart is not proud. My eyes are not haughty. I do not get involved with things too great or too wondrous for me. Instead, I have calmed and quieted my soul like a weaned child with its mother. My soul is like a weaned child. Israel, put your hope in the Lord, both now and forever. So, this is a song of ascents. There was a song released by Hillsong 6 or 7 years ago now, called Highlands, and it has like a subtitle or a parenthetical, a song of ascent, and they're trying to echo this theme of the Psalms, this song of ascent. There's only 3 verses. That, by the way, is the entire Psalm 131. Okay, so if you want to memorize an entire Psalm, 131 is a great one to start with. What are these songs of ascent? Because we'll see this superscript above some of the Psalms, and I see how it lifts us up above the demon cloud, and we behold God, and we get a glimpse of the heavenly gift. And this is a spiritual act of ascension, just to glorify God. And then when you do what you can to behold the invisible God, give him glory, and then your eyes return back down to earth, everything else looks so much smaller because your soul, your spirit had ascended for a moment there. Another reason why I think worship is just vital for survival functionality. Like, I don't know how people live without worship. So look at this. My heart is not proud. My heart is not proud. It's funny when you see a child talking arrogantly. Usually, he or she is just doing an impression. Children know that they don't know things. In fact, um, my parents were staying with us for like a week or so, and this was a few years ago, and I had grown numb to it. I didn't even realize it. My dad pointed out to me the vast number of questions that my kids ask me all day long. Kids know that they don't know things. It's why they'll ask. I think I Googled it, and it was something like 100 questions a day. I don't know. Somebody else Google it and see what the latest result is. I don't know if somebody's done a study on this or what. But as a father of multiple children, I can tell you, yeah, it's probably 100 a day. They don't presume to be experts, and they don't feign mastery over the world. This verse articulates the humility of a childlike heart. My heart is not proud. My eyes are not haughty. I don't get involved with things too great or too wondrous for me. Like little 3-year-old dude looks at the high dive and is like, oh, nope, not time for that yet. And this is the humility with which adults are to approach God. Lord, my heart is not proud. My eyes are not haughty. I do not get involved with things too great or too wondrous for me. In like working with drum lines. Bear with me because I realize that some people can't tell the difference between like a drumline kid and your average band nerd. They're all kind of lumped together, but I can tell you they're different. They really are different. And I know that sounds exactly like something a band nerd would say, Jesse. Yeah, and it is. But I'm telling you, it's just different. So I realized that I just lost probably 95% of my audience by using a drumline reference because it's just like this niche world within this niche world that's like seen as a support role and a subordinate to the football team on Friday night. So I know that most people won't be able to relate to this, but try because it was it was pretty striking to me. Um, when drum lines, there's no band involved, it's just drumming. It's called indoor drum line, and it's not on a football field, it's on a basketball court. And drum line is just the drums, and they get out there and they play something, and then they get a score. And the next school comes up and plays something, and they get a score. And then you go to like regional competitions, and then there's a world championships for just drumline. And after the competition is over, the director of the drumline can go meet with the judges. And the judges are usually like professors of percussion at prestigious universities and schools of music, or people who have accomplished a lot in the activity. And they've had success competitively with lines that they've taught or written for, and they'll they can talk to you about the score that they gave you and ways to improve your show. And what I've noticed that time after the competition, after the scores are announced and medals are awarded, you get to go to this critique and you get to go talk to the judge. That's the reason that I bring up this example, even though I know it's like the most obscure ESPN 8 the Ocho thing out there. Getting to talk to the judge after being judged is something that I've only ever seen in this particular activity. And I'm amazed at how the drum lines that show up at these competitions and get the highest scores, there's often a humility in the staff of that winning group. Sometimes there's a big head, and usually those are the ones that end up not winning for long. And then I've also seen that like sometimes the worst groups are the ones whose directors get to critique and want to put their finger in the judge's face and are totally deluded. I think that the Dunning-Kruger effect was disproven because no one else could replicate the findings. But for a minute there, I thought that it seemed legit because the Dunning-Kruger effect is this thing where you way overestimate your own competence and you're incapable of seeing competence in people who are actually competent. And you just become totally deluded, blinded by your hubris, and you think that you're awesome at something that you actually stink at. And you think that people who are actually awesome stink. That's the Dunning-Kruger effect in general. And again, it's sort of a disgraced study now, but I did see the arrogance of the losers and the humility of the winners in that unique setting. I mean, what other opportunity do you have to do that aside maybe from like a reality TV cooking show or something? And usually then it's like the contestant who just got cut from the show will like rant and rave and then go away. And that kind of even further proves my point. This is calling for humility. Okay, God, I don't know how much I don't know. You know things that are too great and too wondrous for me. I'm not able to fully explain why gravity works. Okay, I know that it does have a relationship to space-time, and that the closer you get to a massive gravitational body, the more you experience time dilation. Interstellar is like one of my favorite movies of all time. And I still don't know how to explain it. Maybe that's because I majored in freaking drumming. Gosh, what was I thinking? But I don't know how it works. I can't quite explain it. I've been curious about this, and most of my time is spent studying this stuff, and I don't really get the chance that often to study astrophysics. So like I've already played the part of like armchair economist from the pulpit, and I was self-conscious enough about that, so I won't even try to play armchair astrophysicist. I'll just openly tell you that there are things about the way that the universe functions, things in cosmology that totally blow my mind. And the James Webb Space Telescope happens to share the exact first and last name, by the way. This eponymous, or the namesake for this space telescope is the same name as this guy who I knew since childhood. My dad was like a catcher in this over 40 baseball league, and oftentimes his this guy James Webb, his dad would be the pitcher, and our dads would team up, and we would cheer for our dads and play baseball on our own and climb around the bleachers. And then he would go on to join drumline with me in high school later, at the same drumline I was in high school later on. And then he died of cancer September 22nd, 2004. So maybe there's another reason why the James Webb Space Telescope is kind of special to me. And it's kicking our tails. There are things that were like settled science a couple of years ago that are just out the window now. And we're like back to basics. And we can't explain things about the age of the universe now. And it's humbling. It ought to have been humbling. I'm curious if anyone, if the Lord has used the findings of the James Webb Space Telescope to lead anybody to Christ. If that's you, please tell us in the comments, because I would love to hear your testimony. That'd be so cool. Because as I'm watching just the bits and pieces that I get about findings from the James Webb Space Telescope, and I feel like I understand like maybe a thimbleful of it, as I learn more about it, I wonder if there are people who are coming to Christ because of this. It's so humbling. I mean, there are things that we think we know, and we put them in textbooks, that are edited and proved by the most brilliant minds who are standing on the shoulders of the most brilliant minds of the last generation. And we have such conviction in our own epistemology, and we have found things to be factually true. And now it's time to teach this to children and in all the schools across the US. And then oops, turns out that was wrong. I think that we scientifically as a people have lost this humility. I do not get involved with things too great or too wondrous for me. This verse also calls for the believer to tolerate mystery in the pursuit of God. You're not going to have an absolute perfect understanding of every single jot and tittle in the universe as you seek God. I believe that you'll have it in glory one day, but in the meantime, we know what we need to know. And God has shown us all that we need to know here. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And so by that fear of the Lord, I know where the universe came from, and I know where life came from, and I know why it exists and where it's going. And so that's my epistemology. It's built on the word of God. The things that I don't yet know, I'm patient and I'll wait on the Lord. This verse reminds us of that mystery. We're finite beings reading a book written by the infinite one. And there are things that are beyond our understanding. Then the image of verse 2 totally changes. All right, I have calmed and quieted my soul like a weaned child with its mother. My soul is like a weaned child. So if you're not familiar with this word, got a child who was breastfed by his or her mother, and then to be weaned is, okay, it's time for you to now take on solid food. And this means that there's satisfaction in this weaned child. I have calmed and quieted my soul like a weaned child with its mother. My soul is like a weaned child. What do newborn babies do when it's time to eat? Right? When they're hungry, they cry. But instead now, he says, I have calmed and quieted my soul. Though verses 1 and 2 seem to come from different directions, I do kind of see I do kind of see a contiguous line of thought between the two. Perhaps what David means by this is there are things that are too great and too wondrous for him, and he has come to terms with that, like a baby who has now been weaned and is okay. It's like you used to cry and demand to be fed, but now upon being weaned, there's a degree of satisfaction in the child. There's a calm and there's a quiet. There's no longer the screaming out and crying for milk. You've been weaned. My soul is like a weaned child. I'm okay now. I'm not proud. I'm not haughty. I don't get involved in things that are too great and too wondrous for me. Instead, my soul is like a weaned child. Like, I'm okay. I've been taken care of. And it's just time to move forward onto the solid food. And then he gives us the application. In the original intent, it's Israel, because that's his original audience. Put your hope in the Lord, both now and forever. Our geometric motif of the saved person, or the human experience, graphed out like a ray in geometry. When you're alive the moment of conception, you physically die, but you exist forevermore. So look, there it is, now and forevermore. Put your hope in the Lord. So the child that is not yet weaned and is hungry will cry. And Israel is to put her hope in the Lord rather than to cry, rather than to be overwhelmed, rather than to try to get involved with things that are too great, too wondrous for them. Instead, like the satisfied, well taken care of, beloved, weaned child, this newborn baby held by his or her mother, totally oblivious to how the combustion engine works, for example, has no clue what the Human Genome Project is, doesn't care about the House of Representatives. Like, there's a billion things that this weaned child doesn't yet understand. Instead, this weaned child, satisfied, held by parent, has put his or her hope in the one who has cared for him, both now and forever. So the application that David gives after giving this incredible statement that he, King of Israel, doesn't get involved with things that are too great or too wondrous for him, and this parable of the weaned child, the takeaway is put your hope in the Lord both now and forever. Picture the child held by his mom, weaned, satisfied, taken care of, no longer crying, content to understand, like, that baby is not proud. That baby's eyes are not haughty, right? And that baby doesn't get involved with things that are too great or too wondrous for him. Instead, just puts his hope in his mother. So in a similar fashion, we as New Testament believers apply our lives to this text by way of becoming like that weaned child. Now, that imagery might seem emasculating for men. You might be like, yeah, I got to act like a baby that just recently stopped nursing. That's what you want me to become like before God? Yeah. Now and forever. And I'll give you an example, and we'll close with this. Jesus effectively teaches the same thing. Matthew 18. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, so who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? It's a stupid question, by the way, but I've already taught this. Go see the series Fulfillment. He called a small child and had him stand among them. Okay, small child, by the way, the Greek word that's used here is paidion. It could refer to an infant. Truly I tell you, he said, unless you turn and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child, this one is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one child like this in my name welcomes me. Now, verse 5 sets the stage for what comes next, and that is a vital text. In fact, I would submit to you that the instructions that Jesus is about to give in Matthew 18, while this small child, this Paidion, is still right there with him, is, I think, the most frequent point of failure in modern churches because they don't do what Jesus said. We as Christians suck at confronting each other because we'll go to the whole stinking world and not the person we need to talk to. We'll talk about them on the internet. We'll gossip about them. We'll do anything to avoid just having the conversation. It's the number one point of failure. The instructions he's about to give, set up by this child that he holds. In fact, into chapter 19, you can see more imagery that's incredibly doctrinally important, all centered around these children that are with Jesus. It's never failed. The instructions that are provided based on this image have never failed. And every time they've been botched, it's been catastrophic. But every time they've actually been followed, the result is incredible. Even when it gets to step 3. I've seen it. But I want to zoom in on this. Truly, I tell you, he said, unless you turn and become like little children, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child, this one is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. You see why I refer to that after this imagery that David provided in Psalm 131? So if you're put out by the notion of Psalm 131 calling us to put our hope in the Lord now and forever, like a weaned child who has no concept of things that are too great and too wondrous, look at Jesus' words and be warned. Truly, I tell you, that's Jesus, said, unless you turn. This means that look at verse 1. They're all up on themselves. They're trying to argue about who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. They are trying to take on things that are too great for them. They're trying to speculate and even compete with each other on things that are far too wondrous for them. And they need to be taken down a notch. And so here comes this little baby boy. And this little baby boy is going to be central to these teachings, including, by the way, the famous leave the 99 to go after the one that got away, the one that went away. That's like a sheep image, but it's in the middle of the teaching, all based on this child. They have the totally wrong-headed attitude. They're like a scientist who's come to a conclusion that's untrue, but is incapable of acknowledging the fact that, like, you were wrong. You must turn. Truly, I tell you, he said, unless you turn, okay, think repent, humble yourself. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child, this one is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So check your hubris, check your pride, become like a weaned child, become like this little boy right there in the lap of Jesus. Do not misconstrue this as emasculating men, because this actually leads to eternal greatness. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child, this one is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Where do you want to be great? You want to be great here? The expiration date on your greatness? Or do you want to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? To be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, we got to be humble before the Lord. Check your hubris at the throne of God. Become like a child held by God. Not haughty, not proud. Aware that there are things too wondrous and great for you to understand. Humbling yourself before him. Turning away from your arrogance. Right? One of the most important things that you and I learn is that we don't know anything, but we know the one who does. And so we humble ourselves. We're held by him. We're safe. We're loved. We're eternally cared for. Counterintuitive as it may be, we must be humble before the Lord.